Top 10.
Madagascar, the big island off the coast of East Africa, a place that is often relegated to a footnote in most discussions of Africa. But today, we give this fascinating island the attention it deserves. I recently read the book Madagascar, Island of the Ancestors. It's one of the very few books to discuss the arts of Madagascar that has been written in English. Most other sources are apparently written in French. With the help of this book and other sources, I have compiled a list of what I think are the top 10 artworks of Madagascar.
Number 10.
The first work of art on this list is the Zebu basketry hat. Not only does it have a mesmerizing, almost vibrating zigzag pattern in its weave, but atop the cap is a marvelously abstract zebu, which is a very important animal in Madagascar. Cattle not only till the fields, but, like in other parts of East Africa, they show the wealth of their owner, and they are connected to religious beliefs. The Malagasy mark their cattle with cut patterns on the ears. They called this the ancestral ear. They also manipulated the horns of their cattle to grow into particular shapes. This sort of cosmetic treatment is important when deciding which cattle would be fortuitous to sacrifice. The sacrificial ceremony almost always involves a formal address to the ancestors, which is spoken above the animal before it is sacrificed. These ceremonies can be done either to ask the ancestors for help or to thank the ancestors. And so the cattle become a channel of communication with the loved ones who have passed away.
Number 9.
For the number 9 spot, I was at first considering a few different sculptures, but one day I thought to myself that considering the fact that Madagascar has been influenced by many cultures over the years, and two of the most prominent of those cultures is East Africa and Indonesia, which both have masking traditions, it is reasonable to believe that at some point in its history, Madagascar may have had a masking tradition of its own. However, I have never seen an example of any wood, cloth, or leaf types of masks in any of my research thus far. And if such masks ever existed, they're likely lost to history or just incredibly rare. But despite all that, I tried to dig through the internet to find something. And luckily I did indeed find a type of mask. It just wasn't the type of mask I was expecting. What I found are known as beauty masks. This face painting tradition is called Masangioni and has been practiced in Madagascar for centuries. It is primarily an art form done by women, though I have seen a small number of photos of men wearing paint as well. Masangioni is thought to have various benefits, including protection from the sun, softening skin, and removal of blemishes. Plus, it can be worn purely for decoration. Malagasy women are known to wear their beauty masks both in public and at home. Interestingly enough, this tradition of beauty masks does not stem from Indonesian culture or African culture. Instead, it was Indian traders who introduced the face painting tradition to the island. But Masangioni has been made a unique tradition not just because each woman does their own individual designs, but also because the Malagasy don't rely on Indian plants for their paints, but instead ground up endemic plants of the island to create their own paint. The women of Madagascar take pride in putting on their beauty masks, and that's not the only art the Malagasy women are known for producing, which leads us to...
Number 8.
Madagascar is home to a rich tradition of textile weaving, and what we have on screen now is a great example of the skill of the Malagasy weavers. Textiles are very important to the peoples of Madagascar. There are various kinds of fibers used in Madagascar, including cotton, silk, goat's wool, bark cloth, and even banana fiber. Yeah, that's right, folks. I said banana. Banana fibers, specifically. Although, judging by the way it was mentioned in the book, that's probably not super common. And frankly, I don't know if any of the Malagasy fabrics that I've seen are made of banana fibers. I did find out that other parts of the world also use banana fibers though, so here's an image of an Indian guy holding up his pair of banana pants! Alright, I think I exhausted all my excuses to say banana. Anyway, let's get back to our Madagascar cloth. Besides its obvious use as clothing, the other important use is to wrap the bodies of the dead during funerals. Typically, the most elaborate cloths are used for this funerary function, which is why textiles are so important to the culture of the island. Nowadays, in modern times, elaborate cloths can also be made to sell as art pieces to foreigners.
Number 7.
Next up, I decided to highlight this fancy merino sash. It's made of silk, gold, and gemstones. Ornaments like this one would have been wrapped around the waist like how it's shown in this historical painting of a merino governor. Now before we go into detail about this sash, you'll notice this governor has a number of other cool aspects to his attire, and frankly, I almost put his whole stately attire as the number 7 slot, because I really wanted to show this painting. But instead, I decided I should pick just one thing, and so I settled on the sash. His clothing is nice too, but we just talked about fabrics. How about his spear and shield? Well, they're pretty neat, but I've seen cooler weapons in Africa, quite frankly, so I'm skipping those for this list. And how about that hat? The hat, on the other hand, is pretty dang cool, but I had more to say about the hat that we previously discussed, so the Zebu Hat got on the list instead. But yeah, I think both hats are pretty cool, but cow hat wins the day. And if that rustles anyone's jimmies, well, too bad, it's my list. Blah! Anyway, here's another contender that the Zebu Hat beat. This ornately bejeweled and decadently golden crown. Yes, that's right, I'm claiming that the Zebu Hat is better artwork than this royal headgear. Why, you may ask? Because who needs royal jewels when you got cow hat? Fuck yeah! Trust me, I made the right choice. I am, after all, a snooty artist. So, I know what I'm talking about when I say the humble cow hat is better art than this elitist crown. Now, having said all that, I do acknowledge that my number 7 pick is also something worn by elites, but this one at least has some discernible traditional cultural symbolism. Those shapes at the bottom are sometimes seen in personal talismans. They are meant to look like crocodiles' teeth. You see, Madagascar doesn't have lions or elephants or a number of other large African animals. Crocodiles are practically the only formidable animal on the island. Therefore, it's the obvious choice for an icon of power. And the book seems to indicate that this sash is magical like the other talismans of Madagascar. But we'll talk more on that later. Now it's time for...
Number 6.
Spoon! What, were you expecting more golden objects on this list? Nah, dude, I'm hungry and it's not like you can eat gold. Oh, wait a minute, I just remembered rich people eat gold, those bougie bastards. Well, that gold ain't gonna nourish ya, but you know what will? Rice. And you might as well have your rice served with this awesome spoon. The reason I mentioned rice specifically is because rice is very important in Madagascar. Besides being a staple food source, rice is featured in many proverbs, and it's even used for measurements of weight, distance, and even time. For example, the agricultural calendar was constructed around the cycle of rice growth. Another example is the distance between two locations can be expressed by how many pots of rice can be cooked in the time it takes to get to that destination. The importance of rice is even reflected in Malagasy vocabulary, in which they have many terms to describe the conditions of rice. In fact, rice is so vital to Madagascar that for many the food is considered holy. The rice paddy fields are passed down from generation to generation, thus connecting the crop to the ancestors.
Number 5.
Here we have a carving of a consultation with a diviner who is performing a type of divination known as Sikiti. Divination is an important aspect of many African cultures, including the cultures of Madagascar. The Sikiti form of divination is based on mathematics, which employs those seeds you see in the center of the artwork as its counters. It utilizes algebraical algorithms which are applied to random data, the results of which can then be interpreted by the diviner. This algebraic element of the divination is a result of Arabic influences. Divination in Madagascar is done in order to help answer questions and solve problems in the lives of the Malagasy people. A few examples of questions asked of the diviner include what day an important task should be done, like taking a trip or planting crops, or even when to do the ceremonial moving of the family tomb.
Number 4.
Moving on, let's now take a gander at one of Madagascar's famous funerary sculptures. In fact, in most African art books that remember to include some art from Madagascar, the art they are most likely to display, with few exceptions, is that of the funerary sculptures. And they certainly do deserve the respect that art historians have given them, but it's also worth noting that without the book Madagascar, Island of the Ancestors, I would not have been able to make this top 10 list due to other art books mostly ignoring the island. And for those of you who are wondering, yes, the image on the front of the book is indeed a funerary sculpture. The one we have in our number 4 slot is a sculpture that I actually was lucky enough to see in person, which is why I have video footage of it. We actually featured it before in a video on the African Art Museum in Washington, D.C. It's been determined that this sculpture was either made by the Sakalava or Bara people. It depicts an individualized portrait of a warrior of strength and great will. In addition to that, it's one of Africa's most naturalistic artworks. And although naturalism is not a major factor in my own artistic tastes, this statue definitely deserves a high spot on the list due to its historical and ethnological importance.
Number 3.
It's time for the OD. But which OD? There are a variety to choose from. I'll go with this one here. I chose this particular OD because not only do I like the subjects it portrays, which I think are 2 musicians with drums, but also I like how the image was sculpted in that the bodies of these musicians are merged with their instruments, making them one with the music. Now, technically speaking, I already had an OD earlier on this list, but that was a particular kind worn only by high-ranking Marina. At one point in history, there were many OD that served as personal talismans that ensured good luck and protection. It's thought that the most common type of OD was made of simple slivers of wood. But of course there were also human figures, animal figures, and more. There are even said to have been examples of Sarabe script being used as a kind of OD. The Sarabe script are sacred manuscripts written in Malagasy language, but using the Arabic letters. They record such subjects as history, astrology, medicine, and more. Many examples of these texts still exist. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the OD. Many OD were destroyed when the European colonizers came and converted much of the population to Christianity. And speaking of which,
Number 2.
there exists a class of OD that contained immense magical power, all of which have been eradicated off the face of the earth. The only image of one is this drawing made in 1833. These incredibly potent ODs were referred to as Sampy. The Sampy depicted here was sent to England to raise support for missionary work aimed at the eradication of these traditional ritual objects. Sampy were used by priests of the Marina ruler. The powers of the Sampy included abilities such as protecting the military, revealing the best time to take action, ensuring victory, and aiding the kingdom in general. Although there are no other images of other Sampy, 2 others are described in the book. The second highest ranking Sampy in the land was described as follows. In the other box was the idol itself, which they called Ingahebe. Perhaps the nearest and not inappropriate translation of this word is the old gentleman. This consisted of 2 pieces of wood, several finger breadths in length, and about the size of one's wrist in thickness, and their coverings were first dark blue cloth, secondly native silk cloth, and thirdly scarlet cloth. And they were also anointed with castor oil, and with gum used for burning incense. And between them were coral beads, and pieces of silver and white beads. And outside they were ornated with pieces of scarlet cloth and dark blue cloth, so that the appearance was like a bird, having wings and head, the body glittering with the different beads fastened to it. As for the most powerful and absolute highest-ranking Sampy, its name was Reiki Lima Laza. It seems to have had a simpler design than the other 2. It's said to have been a piece of wood swaddled in scarlet with shining silver chains attached. Reiki Lima Laza's power was so immense that one of the most important kings in Malagasy history, Andrianampoini Marina, would spend a year working toward gaining the support of this all-powerful artifact. Before we talk about the last artwork on this list, I thought we'd have one of those honorable mentions sections for this video, and considering who this video is dedicated to, I wanted to include a discussion on the music of Madagascar. Like their visual arts, the music of Madagascar is also multicultural, both in terms of the instruments and the songs themselves. For example, the Malagasy valiha is a type of tube zither whose origin is traceable to Southeast Asia, and the Malagasy jejolava is a calabash resonated chordophone of African origin. In addition to this, when a Malagasy musician plays an African instrument, the tune they play may sound Indonesian, and when they play an Asian instrument, the tune may sound African. This unification of African and Asian cultures, I feel, should be a reminder to all peoples of how great things can come from peoples of different races and backgrounds working and living together in harmony.
Number 1.
For my number 1 pick, I decided to choose one of the first images of Malagasy art I ever saw. The sculptures you see in this image are known as Aloe Aloe, and like the number 4 pick of the list, these too are funerary sculptures. These, however, are made by a different Malagasy culture than the previous example. But before I get into who made these though, let me explain why I chose this group photo instead of picking just one sculpture. The reason is because even though they can be admired on an individual level, seeing them all in their traditional context as a group in this photo left a lasting impression on me. The image imparts a sense of mystery and an air of gravitas. Now, as for who created the sculptures, these belong to the Mahafali culture, and fortunately the name of the artist is actually known. His name is Jean-Jacques Ifiambello. He was born in 1925 and passed away around the turn of the new millennium. He not only helped to preserve the traditional arts of the Aloe Aloe, but also adapted the art form for modern times. Modern Aloe Aloe not only add eye-popping colors, but also have more elaborate scenes atop their apex, and these scenes depict various aspects of the lives of the deceased. In general, traditional Mahafali posts would often have a figure near the base of the carving. I'm not certain if Ifeanyi Bello ever sculpted these base figures, but what I do know is a commonality his older works share with other traditional posts is that the apex would most often be decorated with either birds or zebu cattle. And that's not the only cattle reference here. Look at the ground. When I first saw this, my reaction was, holy shit, what are those things? They look like tentacles. Did Madagascar release the Kraken? What's going on here? Well, let's recall what we said at the start of this video when we talked about the Zebu Hat. And yes, I'm talking about the same cow hat again. Remember when I said that the horns of the cattle were purposely manipulated to grow into particular shapes? Those are in fact what we are looking at now. These are the horns of the sacrificed zebu. It's actually quite fitting that we recall our first artwork when discussing our final piece. It makes this top 10 list rather cyclical, which recalls the traditional purpose of the Aloe Aloe funeral sculpture, and that purpose is to be an announcement of rebirth. Both this video and my previous Madagascar video were inspired by the last conversation I had with my friend Dylan McGowan, whose heritage was partially from Madagascar. So if you enjoyed these Madagascar videos, you can thank my old friend Dylan.